The biggest station in the world, playing all of today's hits. You're listening to Instinct Radio.
Welcome back, Sanctuary family. You are live again inside the sanctuary where the spirit meets the streets. I'm your host, Shekema Silveri, and today's show has been a little heavy.
Hey, you don't introduce me no more.
Oh, and my boo Jack. Jack.
Oh, okay.
Wait. Jack is bae.
Okay. I mean,
I'm
starting to feel some type of way.
Jack is bae.
It's the second time you came in and didn't even introduce me. No.
I'm sorry, Jack. I love you. Everybody,
act like it
Jack
then.
is here. He got a mic.
I do. Okay, just make sure they know too.
Okay.
Now I had worry about when you got somebody that only acknowledge you. You know, that's an issue. You know, I'm here. We together. We in this together. Yeah. Act like it.
Jack, okay. So tell me about your thoughts so far about today's show, Jack.
Very interesting. It's always a good show when you're actually learning and being enlightened.
I mean, I'm a teacher.
Yeah, you definitely are. I mean, I'm really overwhelmed. I'm always trying to figure out how to solve something, how to fix it, not just to look at or listen to it. And my mind is already like, how can they fix that?
I think that's part of your manhood. I think that's how I'm in a program. Like, okay, what we gonna do?
Right.
Like women will be like, oh, that's so sad.
Like, well, what we gonna do?
Yeah. Now what? What we gonna do? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, I guess so, because I know some men. That's just been my thing in 2016. Even at the end of every meeting, it need to be a next step, not have a meeting just we had a meeting.
Right. We need to have a call to action.
Exactly.
Yeah, like what we gonna do? I appreciate that, and I would say, I think it starts with making sure that you share this information, with everybody you know. And one of the things that I appreciate about you the most is that you're good about posting stuff, so like whatever we talk about on the show or whatever new stuff you learn, like you immediately share it with everybody else. And I think that's what too many of us don't do.
I don't know. So when I learn something, I want everybody else to know too.
Because it's kind of like always that whole hidden in plain sight thing where you think you know some stuff, but like if you didn't know, and it's clearly like, been on CBS and all this kind of other stuff, it was out there. It's just that in the circles that we run in, and so some of these things, like I had heard about Henrietta Lacks, and I actually used that inside my classroom, but some of this other stuff I didn't know as much about. And again, I think that we spend so much time focusing on the Tuskegee experiment, and it's almost like they give us that to just keep us occupied. And I'm not trying to diminish what happened because that was horrible, but that's not the only thing you did to me. You know what I'm saying? And so if you give me that and you let me focus on that so much, and it makes it almost as if that incident was a phenomenon, and it wasn't.
Sometimes I believe that's to be true. They give us stuff to keep us occupied, but sometimes I think we just do it. Sometimes I think some stuff come up and I don't. I mean, we just do it. Just stay focused on this little situation, but it's way bigger.
You don't think they did a good job hiding this stuff?
Oh, they definitely did a good job. Yeah, about this particular situation.
Yeah, like I think they did a good job. I think the Tuskegee experiment was given to us on purpose, kind of like to keep the dog chasing its tail. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so much stuff that they did. They just gave us that one bone, and they said, "Here you go, focus on that." And it
worked.
It worked. They know us. What I tell people all the time is that they study us. Anthropologically, like they study us and they took good notes on us as a people, like how we operate, what we do. You know what I'm saying? Like if you look at all these experiments, they took good notes. Okay, black people skin, or black people don't age, or you know what I'm saying? Like whatever the case may be, they have studied us like animals in cages. They know our next move. What we have not done is we have not studied them. You look at the outside of what they got and you want to be like them, thinking that if I get what they got, I'm gonna be like. You haven't studied them. If you were gonna play a game, football, basketball, whatever, you will look at the plays of your opponent, right? And you'd be like, okay, so they run this play, so I got to do. Why we don't do that? They know us.
That's a good observation.
Like they know us like clockwork. Like if we do this, then they're going to do that. But we don't study them. We just kind of keep reacting.
We need to change that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of my favorite books that I ever read was The History of White People. And it was by Princeton, I think she's at Princeton, Nell Irvin Painter, a black lady. She has a white husband. But she wrote a book called The History of White People. It's over 600 pages. And she talked about how white people came to be white and like how they came to be this group of people that now calls itself white.
What's the synopsis of that?
Okay, so they weren't always called white. That's number one. They decided to collectively come together and say, okay, it's more of us combined than it is. Like if we're going to have power, we got to unify ourselves versus we still got the Bloods, we still got the Crips, we still got the Vice, we still got all this stuff. And see, like, they figured out, okay, divide and conquer. So think about it in terms of when Irish people came over here. Irish people were niggers too when they came over here, but they figured if we're going to have some power, we got to combine ourselves with the other white people. So you know how we call them Caucasians? There's only a certain percent of white people that live by the Caucasus Mountains. Everybody else came from somewhere else. But yet we still refer to them as Caucasians, and that's not where they're from. So the Greeks and the Romans didn't even consider themselves on the same team. But now you might say everybody in Europe is a European, they're all white. They designed it that way so that when they started trying to take over the rest of the world, they would be unified. They went to a place, Africa, South America, all these places, where you had individual tribes of people. So they were all from the same location, but they still had a tribal type mentality. They came over unified and said, you know what? I don't even know what tribe you're in. I don't know what tribe you're in, but I know you're not white, so we're going to take you together. And that's how they took us. That's how they took us. And so we're still divided. We're still claiming precincts. We're still claiming zone whatever. You know what I'm saying? We're still doing the same stuff. We got a block mentality when they thinking globally. They didn't say, I want to take over the street. They said, I want Africa. You know what I'm saying? I want South America. They want the whole thing. But we'll be set, you know, they'll box you in and give you 3 little square blocks in your city, and you think you're doing something. But they own every single thing else.
I run zone 1.
I mean, what? What is that? But somebody else run you. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. And so that was, when she talked about it, like the history of it, and I know that for me, one of the most interesting parts was how they decided, like, who was going to be put into that system and who was going to be left out. But then at some point, they all came together. They all thought that it was a benefit to them all to be on one team versus how we're still continuing to do stuff. They figured out we gotta boss up on this thing and unify. And that's how they became white, because they weren't all considered white.
Well, that's a smart move. Sometimes you got, like you said, study them.
Yeah.
You got some of the stuff.
Because think about it, even on the plantation, it wasn't set up like the Irish people were the overseers. They were like the lower class white people. It was other people that lived in the big house and all that other kind of stuff. But some kind of way, the Irish figured out, hold up now. If we think about it, Irish, Russians, Jews, all those people that came as immigrants, they were treated like lower class citizens too. So they were above black people, but they were still beneath. But some kind of way they figured out. Yeah, because think about it. Once you set slaves free, you got a whole population of people. And remember, it was more slaves in this country than anybody else. So now that you set them free, you got to join forces. It's just us against them. Anybody that look like us and anybody that looks like them. And that's just pretty much how it went down. And so it was, I mean, she has all the artifacts in there, like documentation. She just talks about how, you know, how we say blonde hair, blue eyes is the standard for beauty. Well, that wasn't always the case. How did we come to that? Because white people didn't always say that. Having a flat butt and being skinny wasn't always the way that white people wanted to be. How did we come to that? And so she talks about the whole mentality of it, the whole social construct of white versus everybody else.
The history of white people.
The history of white people. Yeah, the history of white people. And I think, you know, and it's more, you have to have more knowledge than just, ooh, I don't like them. You got to do better than that. You know what I'm saying? Like if you got a lot of black people say, I don't trust them, but why don't you? Other than the fact that they're, you know, their ancestors had us enslaved, but like, what's the psychology of whiteness? Why do they do what they do? And why do they keep getting away with it? And if you don't study that thing,
you won't make a good decision.
It's just gonna be, I'm telling you, it's like we are reactionary. They still cause and we still have effect. And that's pretty much it. They give us what they want us to have, they do to us what they want to do to us, and we just respond to it. We gotta do better than that. And so all these things that we've been looking at today were like, how did they do what? Because we had no power. We had no power to fight back. When she talked about the experiments that were done on slaves because they couldn't fight back. As a slave, what you gonna say? There's some documentation on a slave named Lucinda, and she had some kind of like bone spurs or something around her eyes. They bored holes in that lady's skull with no anesthesia. Like they did 6 different experiments on her eyes, put holes in her skull with no anesthesia. But she couldn't even say, no, stop, don't do this to me. She didn't even own herself. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's that kind of stuff. They have images of a slave woman who had a tumor going down her back. Her tumor hung down longer than my hairdo. And I ain't talking about today, I'm talking about when it's pressed. That's how long the tumor was on the back of her head. Because they did stuff drilling on her head, and then the fluid made her skull expand. So her skull was this long in the back. That stuff is there.
You make people mad after they look at your show.
Okay. I mean, if we're going to do something about it, you know what I'm saying? I feel like, well, they say the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. That's how it goes. When you figure out that you've been lied to, and when you figure out that you've been mistreated and you don't even know, you've been angry, but you don't even know why you're angry. Like each generation just passed down the anger, but you don't even know why you're angry. It's because each generation remembers something about it that you don't remember. So when think about our grandparents growing up and watching Tuskegee. You know what I'm saying? Watching people having to go sit to the back of the bus, or watching people go and, just all that's like their anger towards people. They passed it down to us, but they didn't really explain to us why they were so mad. They don't want to talk about it, but you got to talk about it. Just not being willing to be hurt by it is not going to be enough. We got to do the work. Like we really got to dig deep, and we're going to have to cry it out, fight it out, whatever we got to do. But the truth is the only thing that's going to set us free.
Well, this is where you can find the truth, but on the Sanctuary.
The Sanctuary and Instinct Radio. So now, because, it was messy, but it ain't messy enough yet. I'm going to talk about 6 different experiments that most people don't know about, okay? 6 more experiments on slaves and blacks that you just might not know about. So the first one was on a slave named John Brown, and he described the experiment done on him by his master, and his master was Dr. Thomas Hamilton, and guess where they were at? Georgia.
Of course.
So Brown described being made to sit naked
Dirty
on top
South.
of a burning pit. He sat on a stool on top of a burning pit as a part of Dr. Hamilton's experiment. The temperature reached 100 degrees and Brown passed out. Then the doctor stood by to determine how deep his black skin would blister by looking at his hands and feet.
What was the experiment? I don't understand. What was it?
Because remember we talked about the very first experiment we talked about, the research, and they said they believed our skin was thicker.
Thicker, yeah.
So he wanted to see how deeply it would blister. So he set this man on top of a stool butt naked and let him burn.
He couldn't say stop. No, don't do that to my body.
He can't because he don't own himself.
Well, we're in a different world now. We
That
own
fear.
ourselves. We won't. So.
But we don't though, because think about it. Like I said, once they cut my body parts out, what did they do with them? I don't know where my stuff went. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember before I had the mastectomy, because my cancer cells was growing fast, just like those HeLa cells, and they kept saying, "Wow, like the cancer was killing itself. It was growing so fast, it was like reproducing and killing itself." So I had these things called calcifications that you can see on the mammogram. They call them cancer tombstones, basically. But it's these white areas that you see on the mammogram where the cancer was growing so rapidly that all of them couldn't even eat. They were basically dying because they couldn't get enough nutrition, but they were still growing. So before they took me in there to have my surgery, they asked me to sign something saying, "Can we take your tissue for research?" And I'm like, okay, I ain't going to use it. You know what I'm saying? But who knows? Did they pick me because they had studied the pathology? When they do the pathology report, they know everything about you. So mine said on my pathology report, high grade nuclear. That means it's growing rapidly. It's going to reproduce fast. So.
Ain't no telling. You can't know everything, but try to know as much as you can. That's how I feel.
That my stuff might be somewhere making, I don't know, clones or something. You know what I'm saying? Growing ears in a petri dish or something. I don't know. Making kidneys or something.
You'll find out about 30 years later.
My kids, right? They'll be like, dang, my mom did that. But I hope I'm not in no unmarked grave because that'll be real bad. I'm still mad about that. Like, all the, I'm just like,
they
come
know
on.
that. Even if they didn't tell the family, whatever.
Jack, I'm still mad about that. Okay, so that was just one experiment that John Brown reported, but his master did other experiments on him. And it's in a book that was written by, the author's last name is Carnell, and it came out in 2014. So if you're interested in that type of thing, then, Yvette Carnell is who you want to research. So the next one that I want to talk to you about is how they would purchase sick slaves. So slaves that had illnesses and things like that, they had doctors who would come and purchase them. And they purchased them for the purpose of experimenting on them. So like if you were sick or you were elderly or whatever the case may be, they would sell you in bulk to like doctors and hospitals and stuff like that. So we always thought, slaves just died of old age on the plantation. No. Some of them were killed in these experiments. And so, that's why they tried really hard to not get sick, because if you got sick, you might end up getting shipped off to somewhere and you might not come back. And so there was a doctor in the 1850s named Dr. T. Stillman, and you can actually go online and look up his ads for sick Negroes. The elderly and the sick. He put ads in papers and stuff like that, advertising, because he wanted to buy them.
You ever been to the Apex Museum?
Mm-hmm.
That's some interesting stuff. Now,
Yeah,
the
I used to take my students every year.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got mad again. Like, what?
One day I'm gonna sit down and just show you all this. You're gonna be like, now I see why she like. It's so much out there, Jack, and it's like I could do a million shows, and I don't think I would ever uncover it all. I would learn a little bit at a time.
I guess you do 1,000,000 too.
I don't know. The next one is that they actually gave our people plutonium and uranium. In 1945, there was a black truck driver named Eb Cabe who was in an accident. Almost all of Cabe's bones were broken during the accident. While he was being treated at the hospital, he was given a toxic dose of plutonium. Before plutonium destroyed his body, he must have heard about the experiment and escaped from the hospital. He didn't know it, but he was the first to be given the deadly dosage, but he was not the last. There were many African-American guinea pigs who followed behind him, and these blacks were either injected with uranium or plutonium as a part of a radiation experiment. Former Secretary of Energy Hazel O'Leary declassified information on government experiments on unsuspecting African Americans. Uranium and plutonium.
Wow.
So
when was this?
This was in 1945, the first one.
6 years before
So
hemocell.
Before they figured out, yeah. So, you're in the hospital, all your bones are broken. And then they give you this, and they melt your body.
They say he escaped?
He escaped. I'm trying to figure out how he got out of there.
All right. Probably had some help.
He had to.
None.
You got plutonium in your body and you had this bad car accident, like you had to have some help.
I wonder what it did to him.
It said it just destroyed his body. That's all
What it said.
Uh-huh. Plutonium, that's radiation.
I
It'll
know,
burn you from the inside out.
Wow, what that thing was going?
When they give cancer patients radiation, they're burned. Like,
I know.
You know what I'm saying?
My mama fingertips was
yeah, they'll
dark
burn
you. Yeah.
So giving somebody that injecting it, like, that's bomb making material. Prisons conducted experiments on blacks that led to later cancer and other illnesses. So during the 70s, and we're going to talk about this one, during the 70s, prisons conducted experiments on prisoners, most of which were black people. The one we're going to talk about specifically today is the Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia. The Dow Chemical Company paid them to test potential carcinogens on their black prison population. So basically, will you get cancer, yes or no? We need to know.
Wow.
And they just did it on the prisoners. Many of them developed cancer, mental illness, and other skin conditions. One of the most famous incidents that really just broke my heart when I found out about it was civil rights leader and politician Fannie Lou Hamer. They beat her. She was trying to get people to register to vote in Mississippi. And they beat her so bad that they beat her and basically raped her with a nightstick while she was in the hospital. So they beat her so bad. No, while she was in jail, I'm sorry. They beat her. So they took her to the hospital. And while she was in there, they took out her uterus without her knowing as punishment. She hadn't had any kids. And they took out her uterus so she couldn't reproduce. And,
What in the hell?
yeah.
How you find out about that?
Well, when she woke up, I mean, you can't take somebody's uterus out without it hurting. You know what I'm saying? So when she wakes up, then that's when she figured it out. But a lot of African-American women were sterilized during that time period. Now, so what happened was they were sterilizing because they didn't want us to reproduce. So in the medical apartheid book, it talked a little bit about, and she said it a little bit in the video, about eugenics. You know what eugenics is? Okay, so eugenics is kind of like, it's based on Darwin's survival of the fittest. Like only the strong survive kind of stuff. So they said that because we were inferior to them, they were going to sterilize us and basically do everything they could do to get rid of us because we were inferior. So poor white people, like people in Appalachia, stuff like that, they regularly sterilize them and of course black people to get rid of them. So a lot of black people don't want to hear this stuff, but Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, she got money from people at the Klan and Eugenics and stuff like that in order to start Planned Parenthood, because it was supposed to solve the Negro problem. So all these people who were quote unquote feminists and running around saying, oh, we got a right to have, well, you have a right to do it, but understand how it got started. It was to get rid of us. And so they went to some prominent black pastors and they said, preach this to your congregation and explain to them that if they want to get out of poverty, if they want to get out of the ghetto, they got to stop having so many kids. And so we're going to give them birth control and we'll give them abortions to help y'all come out of poverty. You can't have 13 kids and think you're going to come out of poverty. And so that's how she proposed to solve the Negro problem. And there's pictures of her on stage at Klan rallies and all kinds of stuff. And so that's how, and they, people who went to mental hospitals, people who were diagnosed with mental retardation, things like that, once they went to go treat them for those things, they sterilized them. And it was they actually had something called Fitter Families for Future Firesides. And it was an organization that was determined to get rid of anybody on the planet, basically, but specifically in America, that wasn't fit to reproduce. So they didn't believe that certain people had a right to reproduce. And so this is all a part of America.
That's deep.
Yeah. It's all a part of America. And, they gave Puerto Rican women birth control pills that had 6 times the dose because they thought they were more fertile. So they experimented on black women and Puerto Ricans, and they gave them these birth control pills, and all of them ended up having ovarian, uterine, cervical cancer because the dosage. But they thought they were more fertile. So they gave them higher doses than white people. And so this is all a part of America. In the 80s, 90s, there was some experimentation done on black teenagers, and most of them were in Bronx neighborhoods, but they gave them something called fenfluramine, and it's something that's supposed to increase serotonin level, and serotonin is what makes you sleepy. So they figure if we give them this, then it's supposed to make them more docile. But it turns out that the parents of the kids they told them that they were coming to you know how they used to come to your house back in the day and say, we're doing a checkup on your child, but they were giving them this doses of this medicine, and then it destroyed their heart valves. So it caused all kind of things to go wrong with the children, and some of them are still aging, and they haven't even seen all the effects yet that it's done to these people. But they gave it to black boys, trying to see if they could do something to make black people more docile. So when you hear people talking about chemtrails and stuff like that, they regularly experiment on our communities. And they'll just go in and do something like, you might, how you see it look like clouds from yeah. And so that was a part of the same thing. They did the chemtrails, and then they did the fenfluramine on our people.
Fenfluramine. What they tell me it was for?
They said that they were just coming to do a checkup. They didn't even tell them they were giving them anything. They didn't say they were coming to give them anything. And then once the parents filed the lawsuit, they gave them $50 to get an EKG. They basically gave them $200 total, each one of the parents. But the $200 went towards the medical procedures that they needed. So I'm gonna do the procedure, but you're gonna pay me with the money that I'm giving you. And so those kids got nothing. And so these kids were kids who had been out of juvenile, stuff like that. And the parents didn't know, once you get institutionalized, don't nobody want to hear what you got to say. You know how that goes. Right. So the parents thought, oh, well, I'm just trying to help my child. No. And these are kids who had been in juvenile.
You're going to make me go beat somebody up.
I'm sorry, Jack. I love you, though. So the next video that we're going to show, it was kind of a setup because we talked a little bit about the Holmesburg Prison and the pharmaceutical experiments done on the prisoners. And we're going to show this video. And this was done by Penn State University. And, it's just talking about Holmesburg Prison and acres of skin. I'm ready when you are, Jack.
From Penn State University, this is Pennsylvania Inside Out, connecting communities to a world of creativity and knowledge. Here's tonight's host, Patty Satalia.
Welcome to Pennsylvania Inside Out. From 1951 until 1974, hundreds of Philadelphia prisoners were used as human guinea pigs, in an array of unethical and oftentimes dangerous medical experiments. The experiments left many test subjects, most of whom were African Americans, in excruciating pain and with long-term health problems. Our guests are Allen Hornblum, author of Sentenced to Science, One Black Man's Story of Imprisonment in America. He's the first person to shine a light on this dark chapter in American medical history. Also with us is Eddie Anthony, now known as Yusuf Anthony. His story is the focus of Hornblum's book, which is published by Penn State Press. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Patty.
Well, how did you first learn that Holmesburg Prison inmates were being used as test subjects?
Well, I witnessed it. I was actually just out of graduate school, and I decided in the early 70s that I wanted to do some positive work for society rather than completing my graduate education. So I started working in the Philadelphia prisons, and it was on my initial tours through the complex of prisons in Philly that I saw scores of men wearing adhesive tape and bandages and all sorts of wraps around their heads and backs and arms, and I couldn't imagine the prison was that safe. You know, were these, knife fights on a cell block or a gang war in the prison yard? And the next day I asked the guard on the cell block, what's with all these guys who were strapped and wrapped in adhesive tape and bandages? He says, oh, that's nothing, that's just the perfume test for the University of Pennsylvania. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, they're doing perfume experiments. And it was so ridiculous to see these men who were, in many cases, killers and rapists and burglars and robbers, testing perfume. I couldn't imagine it. But in fact, what I had learned was that experiments had been going on, medical experiments, serious invasive procedures, for 20 years before I ever got there.
And not just cosmetics and perfumes.
Absolutely. I thought that was in the minority if there was any perfume. They were doing just anything you can imagine, from the innocuous to the truly dangerous.
Now, was this an anomaly in Holmesburg Prison, or is this something that's gone on in other prisons across the country?
It was widespread in the Cold War years in America. From the end of the Second World War to the mid-70s, at least half the states had one prison that were hosting prison medical experiments. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, led the way with at least 10 prisons that were doing this. And it was quite common during those post-war years where institutionalized populations were being used as human guinea pigs by the medical community.
Your book really is an indictment of the Philadelphia prison system and the medical community. How did the two come to work together?
Well, it was obviously a marriage of convenience. There were folks in the pharmaceutical community and the medical community who wanted to do clinical trials. The University of Pennsylvania is a big research operation, so it was convenient to them and everybody if they could find cheap and available test subjects, and that's what the prison system afforded them. The inmates themselves were desperate to make money, not particularly well educated, so they naturally gravitated to a test where they could make far more money being a guinea pig than they could pushing a broom on a cell block.
Was it money that lured you to do your first test?
Yes, it was money, and the fact that I didn't have people coming up to visit me at the time to put money on the books for me so I could go to the commissary at the store. And also they was using it to get bail money if you had low bail. Could possibly get out on bail by participating in the tests, That's basically what lured me, you know what I mean?
Tell us about your first test.
They signed me to Johnson & Johnson bubble bath test. And I went over there, and if you ever seen the cover of Acres of Skin, they have a guy sitting on the table with patches on his back. Well, they put 6 patches on my back of bubble bath. But it was a solution they sprayed on my back to seal the pores on my back so that the tape would stick on, so that my back wouldn't sweat, and it was very toxic. That got into my bloodstream, and it poisoned me, and I'm still suffering from that particular test right now today. My hands and stuff broke out, my feet.
If we had a shot of your fingernails, we can see that your fingernails are rougher than normal fingernails.
And they were a half-inch thick.
And these look good now. These look good now compared to the way they were when I was incarcerated and through the years. You know, they was like, my one finger was the size of 2 fingers. And my fingernails was growing like claws. And in fact, before my hands and feet broke out, my whole body was inflamed after the poison got into my system. It was benzoids and isotopes in the chemicals in the can. And I was sensitive to it.
Is it likely that he really wasn't testing bubble bath?
Probably was not, but we don't know for sure. These men were actually treated like guinea pigs. They weren't told exactly what it was. In many cases, they were deceived. I haven't found anybody who knew that they were being injected with radioactive isotopes or were told they were being involved in a test with Dow Chemical where dioxin was being placed on their faces and backs. So in many cases, just like you would not tell a guinea pig, this is what I'm going to do to you today, they did this with human beings in the prison system.
And it wasn't just the University of Pennsylvania Medical School involved in this. It was also the Army and the CIA. There was military testing going on as well.
If you were in the business of testing products or wanting to put a product on the market, you knew about Dr. Kligman, University of Pennsylvania, and Holmesburg Prison. They were infamous, notorious in the field of human experimentation. So you had Dow Chemical in Michigan coming to Philadelphia. You had R.J. Reynolds in North Carolina for tobacco cancer tests coming to Philadelphia. You had the Army in Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, coming to Philadelphia because they knew that was a site where you could get anything tested on people.
So those are the contractors who are
correct.
paying. You're making a little bit of money. The prison's making a fair amount of money.
They're making more, and the doctors and the major proprietors, you know, the chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies, are making the big bucks.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago Mr. Hornblum's first book, Acres of Skin, Human Experiments at Holmesburg Prison, a true story of abuse and exploitation in the name of medical science. When that book came out, you and others in the Philadelphia community, I think, were astounded to read this was your story out there.
That's right. And we thought that we didn't have a case or a way to go, you know, get recompense for what we went through. But after the book came out, we decided to come up with a class action lawsuit because we found that it's a law called the rule of discovery. We thought we had signed away our rights when we were incarcerated, and we found out that the papers that they used was illegal. But when the book came out, it pointed, you know, to the direction that they had misused us. So we came up with the class action lawsuit, but we never got through the courts. You know what I mean?
Well, one of the, you bring up an interesting point, one of the hallmarks of the Nuremberg medical trials from 1933 to 1945, Nazi doctors used concentration camps in much the way as the Holmesburg prisons were used, was a code of ethics. And one of the codes is informed consent.
First principle.
Explain what that is, and then I'm going to talk to you about what you thought you were getting.
Well, one of the very sad chapters of American medical history in the 20th century is that we tried the Nazi doctors. We harangued them. We told them what proper research medicine is like. We executed 7 of them. Then we write this excellent code of 10 principles, but we never bought into it ourselves. It was remarkable. We told other countries how to do it. Many of them bought into it, but we ourselves moved into the Gilded Age of research in the 1950s, where we were using retarded subjects, we were using the emotionally disturbed, we were using pregnant women, all sorts of people who were institutionalized were grist for the research mill, and that was very sad. With regard to that first principle, it also goes into the fact that the test subjects should not be in a confined or coercive environment, which is particularly poignant to the story of Acres of Skin and Sentenced to Science. Our history of using prison inmates is a pretty bleak one, and unfortunately the government is actually thinking of returning to it again. So it's something that Yusef and I are very much opposed to.
What did you think you were getting into?
Well, they coerced you to believe that the tests were safe, you know, and you know you weren't taking a chance or anything. But when you go over there, they gave you a simple piece of paper that read like, if something was to happen to you after the test, you can't hold the University of Pennsylvania responsible. So right there, you would automatically question. I thought they were safe. They said, they tell you, this is just a formality. Just, you know, you just have to have your signature to make it believe that it was, you know, everything was all right. But after they got you over there, and if you got sick, they didn't have no aftercare in place or nothing, you know? Like, this happened to me in 1964, and here it is, 2007, I'm still suffering from that, you know?
I want to get back to that in just a moment. This is Pennsylvania Inside Out on WPSU. I'm Patty Satalia. In his new book, Sentenced to Science, author Allen Hornblum tells the disturbing story of Eddie Anthony's days as a Holmesburg prison test subject. The book is a searing indictment of the criminal justice and medical communities that disdainfully used Philadelphia inmates as human guinea pigs in an array of unethical and questionable experiments. Our guests are author Allen Hornblum and former test subject Eddie, now Yusuf Anthony. Despite the experience of your first test,
So Sanctuary family, as you can see, not only was it done, but based on what Hornblum is saying, the government was involved in it. A lot of the cosmetics and pharmaceutical companies that we go by abuse people in order to come up with the formulas that we use today. And even now, Johnson & Johnson is having to pay people because of cervical cancer, because of talcum powder. So you can imagine if that got through the process and it still ended up producing cancer in all these people, what was it like before they figured out? They had to experiment on somebody to make their product. I think it's time we take a little break. What do you think, Jack?
Okay.
We'll take a little break, and when we come back, you'll be live again inside the Sanctuary on Instinct Radio.
This is crazy important.
In the mix. The biggest station in the world.